The era of the 10th generation Honda Civic Type R has ended, and this is the finale with the 2021 limited edition. Now, our previous two videos covered all the technical details, so we're not going to go over all of that again. We are going to celebrate the good and the bad of this generation car because we've already seen the 11th generation hatch, and it is a much different approach. Now, the 10th and 11th generation Civic is a global design, which means they don't have a different looking Civic for each market. So whether you're in the UK or the United States, they look identical. However, they split up the design between the coupe styling, the hatchback styling, and the sedan styling. In this generation, the hatch had the Japanese influence. And believe it or not, his focus, or their focus, was to make this more Euro looking or Euro inspired. And I would say that carries over far more in the 11th generation car than it does here. But let's talk about this. This styling is absolutely one of the strangest parts of this generation car. Now, if you're a fan of some of Honda's old classic styling, you looked at this like I did when it came out and thought it was a grotesque spectacle. It's a horror movie of over-styling. And you're either in two camps. You absolutely detest this car and the way that it looks, or you love it because of its character, its uniqueness, and there's absolutely nothing else on the road that looks like this. You could spot this car from a mile away. In 10 years, you're gonna be like, that was a Civic. But it is very shouty for a car like this. The interior space is a mix of what Honda does great and terrible. It's a continuation of the 9th generation interior. There's just some gimmicky looks and plastics and overall usability. But I think Honda still was grounded in the fact they listened to what people wanted by maintaining some physical controls or bringing them back, fixing the complaints with some of the touch-sensitive surfaces. There's a lot of matte textures in here. There's no shiny black. Usability-wise, the storage is tremendous. These Type R seats are some of the best seats you're going to get into in any affordable car. They are supportive. They breathe well. You can deal with them on long trips. And finally, the biggest pro of the Type R hatch. It's a real car. And what do I mean by that? When you spend 4 or 5 days daily driving this and you realize there are literally no compromises for driving a sportier vehicle. It's got one of the biggest hatches of any car in this segment. The human capacity is amazing. You can be almost any body type and fit in the front seats. You have great headroom, shoulder room. There's plenty of room to breathe, and your backseat passengers aren't crammed back there like they're in a tuna can. And this is something we talk about a lot. To make a pure sports car, a lot of times you have to make compromises, either in space, usability. And this Type R, or this generation car, blends the practical things you need every day from a car. If you can't afford to have multiple vehicles, and as we know, cars are getting more expensive, this really can do it all if you understand its limitations. Yes, it's still front wheel drive, so you need to manage tires if you're in a bad climate. Yes, the infotainment isn't the most cutting edge, but it does almost every single thing very competently, and that's one of the things that I've appreciated more as this car has aged. But let's get into the shop, and we're going to talk about what's special to the LE and kind of the finer points of what they're trying to do with this mechanically. We are underneath the last of its kind, the 10th generation Civic Type R limited edition, Jack. And when we're done with this, probably a few people are going to get it, and then it's going back into the Honda Museum with some of their other classics like the Type Rs, the NSXs, the old S2000s, CRXs. So I look at this in a way like we're probably never going to get to drive this again or see it again. So it's a send-off.
Yeah, and this is if you are someone who values Honda products and you don't really care about the value aspect of it, particularly after dealers get a hold of you, this is a very special car. So walk me through very briefly, because again, we've done a lot of Type R videos at this point, what the Civic Type R is.
The Civic Type R is Honda's highest performance front wheel drive. It is the pinnacle of what they can do in, I hate to say value, but it was their affordable sports car for the masses. So this isn't going to have exotic materials. This isn't about having the absolute best numbers on the planet or the fastest on a straight line. It was about being usable, practical, engaging, and fun, and having that hard edge. So you look at like a Civic hatchback, and I'm going to put up a chart here. This is kind of how Honda breaks down the Civic lineup. You have the regular, you have the hatchback, then you have the hatchback Sport, and then it goes to the SI, which is kind of the middle ground. And then they put the regular Type R near the top, and then the LE is at the very top. And as you talked to me about, this was kind of thought about to break that front wheel drive record.
This is the fastest one they made, and the way they achieved it is through clever use of materials and adding lightness. So they pulled 50 pounds out of this car. They did that by removing sound deadening material out of the fenders, the hatch area, deleting the rear wiper, deleting the rear HVAC vent work, taking out sound deadening out of the dash as well, and then on top of that, dropping weight in all the wheels. They added these forged BBS wheels, and they put Pilot Sport Cup 2s on them as well to add more mechanical grip. Plus, they revised the suspension tuning for the dampers, and they also redid the software for the steering.
Yeah, and these are very, very subtle changes. And I'm not going to lie, when you drive this back to back, and right now we're kind of closing out this car with the Mugen Type R or Mugen Type R, the regular Civic Type R, the 2020. And when you drive them back to back, there's subtle differences, but this is not night and day. A lot of it comes from the tire.
I agree.
But what I really want to talk about here is some of the things that we hear constantly. You put a lot of power to the front wheels. And the question is, in this day and age, why not make it all-wheel drive? And there's other competitors that are doing that, but this is Honda's thing. This is what they know best, and one of the reasons why they were able to make use of all this horsepower is, one, a limited slip differential. And because the regular Civic wasn't designed for that much power, they had to completely redesign the front suspension. This is a strut layout, and we know the inherent deficiencies in strut. And we talked about this kind of with the Porsche 911 as they transition their GT3 from strut front to double wishbone suspension. So we've been able to learn a lot from the engineering side of that car, and a lot of it carries over here. And the best explanation I saw of the deficiencies of a strut is if you did leg bends and then you kicked somebody's legs in the side and asked it to do a lateral load, it loses balance instantly because the strut on a strut-based suspension acts as a load-bearing device for the entire suspension.
You're asking it to do more than one thing. We're in a double wishbone car. The strut is not load-bearing.
The shock
is not load-bearing. All it has to do is dampen.
So as it's compressing, as you're under load, typically you're losing camber. There's a very neutral camber angle to strut front. So as you compress, it kind of stays even, and then when you put lateral load on it, it tends to go almost positive camber. So that's why you're losing some of that grip under high G-force. So this is meant to help alleviate that, keep some negative camber in the wheel so you can do two things at once. And then all of the other suspension components here look more like a tradition, it looks more like a double wishbone at first sight, even though they're still using a strut. This is the magic of the Type R, like I said, along with the limited slip differential.
What it feels like though, Mark, is it has eliminated, for a regular person, most of the torque steer in a car with this much torque. I will say, after driving the Mark 8 GTI, this still does torque steer more. However, I feel like because of that, there is more character to the way this car is scrabbling to putting down power.
It is, and you're putting a lot more power than the new GTI that I drove. And on the track when we drove the GTI, I'm like, this is amazing. There's no torque steer, you can put your foot flat, but that's because they designed the perfect amount of power for what the suspension can take. And I think Honda did this, they tried to design the suspension where in the dry, in the right conditions, that you're not fighting the car as much. But you can't fight the fact that this is front wheel drive, and in the wet, when you're scrabbling for grip, we did it. I was joking around when we were driving the Mugen one. Yeah. We turned left, I hit the gas, and the thing just shot out. You can't change the fact that the power is being delivered to the front wheels, but this is the best high-performance front-wheel drive car that's in existence. And I think now that we're going to EVs and alternative fuel vehicles, as this will transition out after the 11th generation, as they're not going to do they're not going to do internal combustion on the Civic Type R after the 11th gen, you'll start to see front-wheel drive kind of go away. So this is going to be even more of a relic and a special piece of history.
So basically, enjoy it while you can. So Mark, let's hit the track and walk through the driving dynamic differences between the regular Civic Type R and this limited.
Absolutely, Jack.
So Mark, we're here for our street drive. We're at Autobahn Country Club, and if you are looking to watch us drive one of these things on the street,
get this thing off the line. I want to feel the limited edition. Oh. Let's turn the fake engine noise off. Oh, so much better. Oh, man.
You know what that reminds me, Mark? Honda can make a great four-cylinder, and they can make one rev, and they used to be able to make one sound good, and they don't know how to do that anymore.
Well, nobody does.
Yeah,
that's
true.
That's not their fault. That's every turbocharged engine now. But you know what makes this the best?
What?
This K20 C5 or whatever, C1 is best than the Ariel Atom 4. That's when you can really feel it. But in the LE, let's just
When you're driving in the scaffolding car?
Yeah, the scaffolding car that weighs half the poundage. So what makes this different from the regular car, Jack?
So we talked about it in the shop. You have less sound deadening, revised steering, suspension tuning, and some other performance bits like tires and wheels. And what this translates to is a sharper experience on the street with some compromises. Being honest, Mark, if you're buying one of these things, at least here in the United States, with only being 500 of them, the fact that the dealers wanted like
scalping you. This is the car you called the deal like, hey, I'm interested in the Type R LE. The guy's like, oh yeah, come on in, we'll make a deal. And he puts on the surgeon's gloves and pulls out a tub of butter right before you come in. And you're gonna walk away for about $50,000 to $60,000. That's what the markups are. And at that point, really what you're buying the LE for is a collectible to celebrate one of the last of its kind type cars, performance front wheel drive cars, before all of the internal combustion goes away. So I get that point of it, and I love the yellow. And I know you could probably wrap it or repaint it like Honda Pro Jason did, but this does look way better than, you know,
the Mugen that we have, or Mugen, and the regular like refrigerator white.
Yes, yeah, I know it's championship white,
me.
Jack. I guess you don't have your Titleist golf balls shined up before this drive. It's a little bit noisier, it's a little bit sharper, it's a little bit quicker, but let's see how this does driving on the track at a quicker clip. We're not going to go flat out because this is a special car, but just enough to give people the impressions.
All right, Mark.
All right, Jack, we already drove this on the street or a street drive. Now it's time to take a little bit more brisk approach at the LE compared to the regular Type R, and we can walk through some of the evolution. What do you think?
So honestly, Mark, this feels like a subtle revision to the regular Type R, specifically on track. It has a far more direct feeling front end. There's obviously far more mechanical grip when you're at the limit, which I'm sure a lot of that is tires. This going to a Cup 2 is definitely more of a track tire. But the way the suspension is taking advantage of the reduced mass and the extra mechanical grip by being stiffer is almost immediately apparent. The front end loads up far better, and it feels similar to the GTI that we just drove, in the fact that the front end has so much grip that some of these corners you could just go flat and basically have almost no understeer.
I would agree with you, and there's a lot of movement in the car, especially when you're in like these higher speed sections. It feels like the rear end really does want to rotate through the corners versus the front end kind of like washing out like a front wheel drive car. The one thing I would say compared to the regular Type R is you do feel the weight reduction just a hair. I mean, it just feels a little bit more lively in terms of acceleration, and the sound insulation removed is instantly apparent. The one thing that I would have to do on this car is this horrendous fake engine noise that they added for the mid-cycle refresh. I mean, I get the fact probably why they did it, so you can hear the engine tone, because this is such a quiet car. Even with the windows down, you don't really hear anything, so you can't keep an eye on the rev counter, or you can't even hear the rev counter, so the fake engine noise brings up the tone, but it takes down the enjoyment factor of driving this thing.
It's almost like a nauseating sound, and it's super disappointing, because you thought, or you would expect, with the reduced sound deadening found throughout this car, that it would sound better. You'd be able to hear more of the whooshing of the exhaust and the induction noise. You can't. What you hear more of is fake engine noise. I don't understand why they made that design choice, because other than that, man.
No, this is, again, I think we've said it enough. When we drove this 2 times on the street and on our track, this is the best front wheel drive car I think ever made.
It's even better than the brand new Mark 8 GTI. This is a generation old, and it's still better than modern cars coming out today.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a good time, Jack, to get to the conclusions and the final thoughts.
All right.
Final thoughts on the 10th generation Civic Type R. We know everything about this car, and now it's gone. And we know the next generation Type R is due out sometime in 2022, and it will take a more conservative approach from this. This is going to be a special car in the history that it lived in. They took a chance with this. They still tried to make something that was fun, high performance. They changed core parts of this car so it wasn't just a hopped up Civic. And I believe, at least in this car, based on the prices it's going for already, this will share the same fate as many of the older Hondas do in 10, 15 years. This will be some type of collectible. The thing is it all that great? Is it really that special? It still carries over some cheapness, like the panel gaps are ridiculous, some of the paint quality is not good, things that we've seen on all the Type Rs. But if you can get one of these, maybe not the LE, for a decent price, and you can enjoy what this generation car has to offer, I feel like this is one of the best efforts in modern history to deliver a usable real car package with something that can drive extraordinarily well at 10/10ths. And that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm somewhat sad to see it go, but I'm also excited to see what the 11th generation car brings. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.